At this year's Synod meetings, I did a brief interview with our guest speaker, Reverend Dr. Sarah Travis. Before we get to that interview, I just want to say how great Synod was. And not just because we were asked by Synod to tell you how great Synod was, I actually really like it. Synod is essentially our provincial level of government. Every church is asked to send their minister and one elder, and it is wonderful to have this chance to meet together in person. We get to see that we are often sharing the same struggles, the same questions, the same discernments for the future. We are not alone. And it is more important now than ever that we meet to support each other. Our guest speaker addressed some of that, talking about the need to name the trauma that we face and how we might find healing. Let's hear more about that now.
Okay, so I'm Sarah Travis, and I'm currently the assistant professor of preaching, worship, and Christian ministry at Knox College. I prepare students for ministry, so in terms of preaching and worship, and how to go about managing and caring for a congregation.
So we're at Synod of the Alberta and Northwest, and we've been talking about trauma and churches. And so, what churches have trauma? Can you tell me something about what was that?
So churches have a lot of trauma. They have a lot of situations that have come up that people and communities find overwhelming, negative events that have led to spiritual disorder and upset. So things like the pandemic, things like political division, things like shrinking congregations and closing buildings and all those kind of things.
So how do we handle that trauma? What do we do?
The first thing we do is name it and acknowledge it, and then be sad about it for a little while, and then we start to look for hope and find new ways of healing and recovering.
You write about you talk about the term refugia. What is that?
So refugia is it's a concept that comes from biology. After Mount St. Helens erupted in 1980, the whole landscape was absolutely destroyed. And what they discovered was that underneath logs and rocks, there were little areas of life that remained. And so in those areas, life was able to regenerate, even though the landscape surrounding was completely destroyed. So I've wondered whether churches can be refugia. So churches can be little areas of safety and growth where new things can emerge, even in a landscape that, even in a world that's so messy and so ridiculously traumatized, that new life can arise within churches. One of the things I'm going to talk about tomorrow is playful theologies. So how does understanding God as playful and us as playful beings help us to heal from trauma?
Okay.
And it turns out that there's a lot of research that says for children that play helps them heal from the things they've been through.
Yeah.
And so my theory is that playful worship helps churches heal from what they've been through.
I like the idea of playful worship. I'm curious. I would love to see a church that actually does
Does it.
So, hint, hint. Let's hope we do that. Let's try that. I don't know what might that look like.
So I think it means a lot of things. I mean, it can mean throwing a beach ball around, but it can also mean playing with language and images and stories in creative ways that allow people to encounter God in ways that are less familiar. So that we learn things about ourselves and about God that we didn't know. I would like it if we walked away with a sense of hope that trauma does not last forever, that healing is possible, and that God does the healing, not us. so that when we come to the end of our resources, God has resources that make it possible for us to be sustained.
Playful worship. I love that idea. It doesn't actually mean playing in worship, though it could, but more about having a playful attitude when we gather. What do we need to do to invite more playfulness into our sanctuaries? How do we make it a safer space in which to experiment, to be vulnerable, to laugh and cry together? If we embrace playfulness, how might it change our worship of God? I wonder.